Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm putting out my updated Bear Druid class guide for Shadowlands Patch 9.2. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. That's probably enough intro. Like and subscribe. All right, let's go. And let's quickly go over the list of class changes to Druids in Patch 9.2. It's very short. The Kyrian Druid Legendary, Kindred Affinity, which granted 8% of a secondary stat to you and your bonded ally, and then doubled up to 16% while Kindred Spirits was empowered, has been massively nerfed. It now grants 6% of a stat to you and 3% to them. Mechanically, it still all works the same. It's just nerfed by 25% for you and 62% for your ally. I was all in on playing Kyrian Bear in patch 9.2 prior to this change. It was extremely strong, fun. I really liked it a lot in raids in Sanctum and actually in Sepulchre testing. Now I think it's kind of underwhelming. I'll go into more detail later, but this nerf hit pretty hard and kind of took a lot of the fun out of it for me. The Venthyr Legendary was also nerfed. Both of these nerfs are because of those stupid, awful boomkins. I hate them so much. Sinful Hysteria's effect has been cut in half. Because it added duration to Ravenous Frenzy, cutting the effect by 50% has had a huge impact on how hard you'll be able to ramp up with all of your cooldowns active. This cuts at least 5 seconds off of the end of the burst, potentially more like 6 or 7, which, that's the spot where you were going to be doing the biggest bulk of your burst damage in a large AoE thrash spam pull. This sucks, man. Boomkins ruin everything. Now let's go over some good new stuff with the Bear Druid tier set bonuses. The 2-piece bonus gives you 4 seconds of Berserk whenever you bark skin. This bonus is great. It works with Incarnation 2, which is also good. It's a free rage cooldown in raids. It gives you a bit of extra frenzied regen cooldown, although not really that much, but every bit's nice. In Mythic Plus, it's really nice for being able to thrash spam at the start of every pull. That helps a lot with getting Iron Fur up quickly and locking down threat when you don't have your big 3-minute combo. This is really great. Really, really good, impactful 2-piece. The 4-piece bonus adds a bunch of totally passive, but massive, AoE damage and self-healing onto your Berserk. It does interact with the free Berserks you get from the 2-piece as well. There's not really a lot to say here. It just makes you stronger when you're already at your strongest. It's really, really good and cements the idea that Bear Druids are the absolute kings of massive AoE damage pulls in Mythic Plus. They are the 3-minute tank. Just like the Monk tier set, this is a pair of bonuses that are kind of boring, but in a way that's extremely good and fun. The 2-piece is actually impactful on your gameplay, although it usually winds up just being thrash spam or maybe mangle spam and pure single target, so that's not really complicated, but it's good. And the 4-piece is totally passive, but it just makes you way stronger at doing what you already do well. You will absolutely want to get this 4-piece bonus as quickly as you possibly can, and barring any unexpected nerfs, you're going to want to wear it until next expansion. Next up is the double legendary power. This is being time-gated until week 5 of the patch, or the 3rd week that the Mythic Raid is open, and I don't like that. Basically, it works like this. When you complete the campaign quests for that week, you receive a legendary belt that you can wear along with any other legendary in the game. The belt grants you your Covenant's legendary power, so for classes that have good Covenant legendaries, this is a huge boost in power. You're not able to upgrade the belt for some reason, although that may change before we unlock it, but you are able to recraft that same legendary and power in other slots once you hit Revered with the new reputation, the Enlightened, I believe is the name. Basically, if you do all the daily quests that are up, every day in the new zone Zereth Mortis, you'll hit Revered right around the same time that you are given this legendary via the campaign. All right, let's move on to breaking down the actual Covenant legendaries. As I said before, Kyrian Druid's legendary has been nerfed a lot thanks to balanced Druids. Technically speaking, being able to run both the Kyrian Legendary and Barkskin Legendary is probably going to be the strongest possible defensive setup in raids. It might even be tankier than like Blood DK or Brewmaster Monk. Linking to a Llarold and getting a permanent 6% versatility that jumps up to 12% whenever Kindred Spirits is active is very, very good. Llarold Druid is very bad. I'm not going to waste any time on it. Night Fae Covenant Legendary is really simple. It reduces the cooldown of Convoke the Spirits by 1 minute. It makes the channel shorter and forces it to use more exceptional skills like Starfall or Pulverize. This bonus is great for maximizing your DPS by Catweaving or Owlweaving. It's also really good for putting out quick, powerful bursts of raid healing and synergizes very nicely with Naya's Grove Invigoration, which still grants the same number of stacks it would if it were a 2-minute cooldown. Finally, Sinful Hysteria is still an okay bonus for Venthyr Druids. Even after the nerf, it still adds several seconds of extra buff up time onto Ravenous Frenzy, and then makes it last for an extra 3 seconds after it's finished. Procs from the Ursoc's Fury Remembered Legendary do count towards building stacks of Ravenous Frenzy, so you may actually get an extra half second or so of extra duration from that over the course of spamming Thrash as fast as you possibly can. You know, 5 to 7 extra seconds of boosted Thrash spam is still pretty decent for maximizing your AoE damage. Now let's move on to the Covenants themselves. Kyrian Bear became fairly popular in high-end Mythic Plus at the end of Season 2 due to how strong this legendary is and, you know, due to being able to, I guess, beef up Windwalker monks, and that nerf is pretty substantial. Even with being able to run another legendary alongside it, I think Kyrian has lost its value in Mythic Plus. It should still be good for doing, you know, this super tanky setup in Raid, but I do think that's about it. Damage-wise in Raids, the buff on your buddy will no longer make up for the damage you personally lose from not just being Night Fae. I think it's really only useful for progression rating from a defensive standpoint, and maybe some kind of fancy shenanigans in high-level Mythic Plus. It's a shame, I really came to like Kyrian Bear Druid. Thanks for nothing, bird brains. Night Fae is the all-around good Covenant. It's terrific for damage in Raids, it's great for damage in Mythic Plus, if you're willing to kite a little bit in Moonkin form. It's terrific for spot healing in Raids. It even gives you a great defensive cooldown if you Convoke in Bear form, but I wouldn't usually recommend doing that. Soul Shape is the best signature Covenant ability. Naya and Karain are both Soulbinds that are really strong. Night Fae's great. I think of it as the default choice for Druids. And finally, Venthyr is still very, very good for Mythic Plus. It synergizes especially well with the new Tier 4 piece. If you're looking to do that style of huge triple, quadruple pull, Thrash spam in Mythic Plus, being Venthyr is still totally awesome. Ravenous Frenzy lines up perfectly with the cooldown of Incarnation, and it will give you the highest overall Bear form DPS and AoE. There's a possibility it could be good for parsing in Raids. I think that probably would only be true on ad fights, but in single target, I think Catweaving as Night Fae is definitely going to be the best choice. Now let me quickly run through Soulbinds. Mechanicos is your only option as Kyrian. Blah, 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 I'm just stalling so you can see what's on the screen for a bit. Okay, I think that's long enough. Naya is the go-to for Night Fae. Karain has been really popular in Mythic Plus due to the 25% crit buff he grants pretty frequently, but once you get the Night Fae legendary, I think the extra juice that you get from Naya's massive mastery and health buff is going to be worth using her full time. And finally, Theotar is the best option for maximizing your DPS as Venthyr. Draven is more consistent defensively, but the thing is, you're absolutely going to be unkillable during your Ravenous Frenzy Incarnation combo anyways. The only way you should die is if you get, like, stunned. Maximizing your damage with Theotar will actually do more to add shields from your Thrash spam anyways, and burning all the ads down faster lowers your chances of being killed once the Ultra combo runs out. So, go Theotar, thrash everything, get an Umbrella proc, do a ridiculous amount of damage, and just kill it all before it kills you. For potency conduits, you basically have two options. Unchecked Aggression is terrific. It basically gives you free Bloodlust whenever you have Berserker Incarnation up, which is awesome. Your Covenant Conduit is also very strong, and it should be your number 2 choice. If you find yourself in a spot where you have a third Potency Conduit available, take Adaptive Armor Fragment. It's just okay, but it is the third best choice. Endurance Conduits are pretty simple, and again, there are 2 clear favorites. Well-Honed Instincts grants an excellent reactive self-heal on a decent cooldown, and it's an absolute must-have. Tough as Bark is the other extremely good Endurance Conduit available to Druids. It reduces Barkskin's cooldown by a decent amount and stacks with Survival of the Fittest in the talent tree to push that cooldown even lower. That synergizes really nicely with the 2-piece bonus to add a lot of offensive and defensive value onto a pretty simple bonus. Condensed Animosphere is a good third place option for raids as it gives you a steady trickle of self-healing. But in Mythic Plus, I would run Layered Mane as my third Endurance Conduit. I think the extra armor buffs have a lot more value in Mythic Plus than they do in raids. Finally, let's look at Finesse Conduits. Again, Bear Druid has 2 excellent Finesse Conduit options. Born of the Wilds is a direct throughput increase due to how incredible Heart of the Wild is as an offensive cooldown. At high ranks, it brings Heart of the Wild down to a 4-minute cooldown, which makes it line up nicely with Convoke the Spirits to really add a lot of offensive punch to Catweaving and Owlweaving. Finally, front of the pack is not always great, but if you're in a situation where you need to give your Stampeding Roar to the raid, getting an extra bit of range to reach everyone and a couple more seconds on the buff so that you can really be sure to move around to dodge whatever mechanic you're dealing with, that's pretty good. Next up is Legendaries, and there's still a lot to talk about here. Before I get into the fun part, let me say that the tier set pieces being on helm, shoulder, chest, gloves, and legs slots means you probably shouldn't be crafting and wearing any Legendaries in those spots. You can wear a Legendary in one slot, but then you're banking on getting 4 pieces of tier across the other 4 slots. I'd rather just not box myself out until I've gotten the 4 slots, filled up with max level tier. Ursoc's Fury Remembered is the most popular legendary for Bear Druids and the clear best choice for Mythic Plus. It adds a lot of AoE DPS, it adds shielding that doesn't get reduced by effects like Necrotic or Mortal Strike, and it's a lot of fun. This is a good legendary for AoE fights and raids where you still need some defensive power as well. It synergizes really nicely with the new 2-piece bonus since you can quickly Barkskin and then start spamming Thrash for a bunch of damage and shielding. And if you're only going to make one Bear legendary, I would say do this one. Do Ursoc's Fury Remembered. If you're primarily going to play Bear Druid in Mythic Plus, again, same deal. You could pretty much slap this on and only use it and get away with that. If you are going to raid pretty seriously, the best all-around defensive legendary for Bear Druids is the Natural Order's Will. It's extremely strong. It buffs Barkskin's damage reduction by another 10% and makes Barkskin, when you're in bear form, also cast Frenzied Regen and Iron Fur both when you cast it and when it falls off. That's a ton of free defensive value, and it interacts really well with the new 2-piece bonus. It's definitely a weaker option in Mythic Plus than Ursoc's Fury, and I would only use this for serious raiding. Draft of Deep Focus is the #1 single target DPS option. This legendary synergizes extremely well with Catweaving, but it only works when you're in pure single target. It's by far the best option for maximizing your damage in single target or mostly single target fights and raids, but that's all that it adds. Finally, Embrace of the Sleeper is seeing a rise in popularity due to the new tier set bonuses. The synergy between this and the new tier 4 and 2-piece actually is very strong, and this will be the #1 legendary for maximizing burst damage in AoE. I don't really know how much value it's going to provide in Mythic Plus, because while it does add a lot of damage, the defensive value is extremely low compared to Ursoc's Fury Remembered. Also, since you're probably going to be Venthyr if you're playing, Incarn, The cooldown reduction this provides is basically worthless. You don't want to desync your Ravenous Frenzy and Incarn from each other. So just to recap, for Mythic Plus, you're going to use Ursox Fury Remembered. For raiding, you can use Natural Order's Will for defense, Draft of Deep Focus for single target damage, and I think Embrace of the Sleeper for raid AoE damage only. All right, now let me go on to talents, and I'll just throw up the Mythic Plus and raid recommended talent setups here, along with a little tag that says raid on one side, Mythic Plus on the other. Bear Druid has several really good competing talents across several tiers, so let me just go over those real quickly. In the first tier, Brambles and Blood Frenzy are both good popular talents. Blood Frenzy is much better for rage generation in AoE, which helps with keeping stacks of Iron Fur high in Mythic Plus. In raid, I pretty much always use Brambles for the passive damage and absorption, as well as the tiny little damage cooldown that you get out of using Bark Skin. In the second tier, Renewal and Wild Charge are both great options. You can usually get away with just never using Wild Charge. I tend to use it all the time because I like it, but Renewal is a really strong self-healing tool. It's basically a health stone on a 90-second cooldown that you can use, over and over during a fight. I just feel weird without Wild Charge, but you can absolutely live without it pretty much all of the time. All three affinities are situationally useful. Balance is arguably my favorite in terms of the passive value. Having more melee range is just really nice, but all the passives are pretty great. Ultimately, this tier comes down to what kind of content you're doing. If you're worried about not being able to shift out of bear form and live, then Resto Affinity is the safest choice. It's also just a good choice if you're under geared, and it can help you, let you help out your healers in raids, I guess. For raiding, Sepulchre, the first ones, has a lot of taunt swap fights, so there are tons of opportunities for Bear Druids to shift into Cat or Moonkin form and add a lot of damage, and for that it's basically just a binary choice. If it's AoE, you go Moonkin form. If it's single target, you go Cat form. If you want to try to help heal, that's okay, as long as you have that coordinated. That's useful too. I generally use Balance Affinity when I'm in Mythic Plus, and I try to Owlweave when Heart of the Wild and Convoke are up. I also try to start kiting before I Owlweave. I'll usually Typhoon, and then, move away, shift into Balance form. I guess Heart of the Wild my way directly into Balance form without a GCD, and then Convoke, and so on. In the fourth tier, I almost always run Heart of the Wild. If you're Resto Affinity, you could run Mighty Bash to help stun. Mass Entanglement's really helpful in Mythic Plus to lock down enemies during Spiteful Affix weeks, or if you're in a dungeon with mobs that really need to be rooted, like the Fox adds on Mistcaller and Mists of Tir-Naseath, or the Oozes in the first fight of Plaguefall. It's a big DPS loss to not run Heart of the Wild though, so I basically only ever do it if I absolutely need the CC. In Tier 5, Galactic Guardian is the best DPS choice for raids, still, even with the new tier set bonuses. It adds a lot of rage generation as well. Incarnation is a burst DPS and defensive cooldown. It's amazing for Mythic Plus, and it synergizes really nicely with the two new tier set bonuses, so I would say it's the default choice for everything right now. It's generally a little weaker in raids than the steady value you get from Galactic Guardian, but it's a lot closer in value once you have the 4-piece. Earth Warden is generally the best talent in this tier. It's a must-have in Mythic Plus, and usually the best choice in raids. The real problem with it is that there are a lot of bosses who don't auto-attack. Sylvanas is probably the most notable example. Technically, she never auto-attacks. While most bosses still do auto-attack, and for the most part, being able to mitigate that's really powerful, a lot of the times their abilities are more dangerous than their auto-attacks. Because of that, Survival of the Fittest, Bark Skin, and Survival Instincts cooldown is very strong. If it's a fight where having that Survival of the Fittest, Bark Skin cooldown reduction means you're able to Bark Skin every one of a dangerous attack instead of every other, that is worth sacrificing the constant damage reduction of Earth Warden, in my opinion. Because Bark Skin cooldown reduction synergizes really nicely with the new tier set bonuses, I could see it being worth using just at all times in raids once you have tier pieces unlocked. Also, if you're running the Barkskin Legendary, then there's really no question you should definitely be running Survival of the Fittest. In the last tier, Rend and Tear basically always reigns supreme. It's by far the most consistent option and nearly always better than the competition. Pulverize is worth mentioning in that it's a really good defensive cooldown option if you absolutely need it. It's basically a shield wall on a 45-second cooldown. That's very strong as a defensive skill in high-end progression rating, but for anything outside of that, where you absolutely have to have another cooldown to mitigate some massive damage hit from a boss, Rend and Tear is going to be better and way easier to use. So just to recap, I'd say there's one really good all-purpose Mythic Plus talent tree, but you can move things around as you see fit. For rating, it's a bit more of a case-by-case basis based on, you know, whether the fight is single target or AoE, or if you're trying to help heal, whether you want to use Wild Charge or Renewal, and maybe swapping between Galactic Guardian and Incarn, Earth Warden and Survival of the Fittest, so on. Now moving on to the Bear Druid rotation, it's pretty simple. You want to use your major cooldowns as much as you can, but that mostly just means Heart of the Wild Convoke when that combo is available and makes sense to do, and Incarn and Ravenous Frenzy in Mythic Plus once you have a large pack of mobs together. As for Iron Fur, just maintain stacks whenever you're actively tanking. If you see a big burst of physical damage is coming in, try to get 2 or 3 stacks of Iron Fur up to mitigate it, be aggressive with your Bark Skin and Survival Instincts, and use Frenzied Regen to get your health pool back up after you've been chunked down. Now, I've talked a lot about Catweaving and Owlweaving, but I haven't really given any instructions on how to do them, and I think that's probably worthy of probably an entire video series, but I at least want to do a brief, dedicated section to each of them. We'll start with Owlweaving because it's a lot simpler. Owlweaving is basically just shifting into Moonkin form to use Sunfire, Star Surge, and Convoke. In cases where I'm not tanking, such as in raids or bosses like the first boss in Mist when he's stunned, I'll stay in Moonkin form if I have Heart of the Wild up so that I can keep casting Wrath or Starfall depending on what eclipse I'm in. I would say I generally don't use Moonkin form much in Mythic Plus. Basically, I'll Typhoon and run away, shift into Moonkin form, Sunfire, Star Surge, Convoke, and then get back into Bear form and get back into melee range and continue tanking. The main thing you don't want to do is be in melee range if you're not in Bear form, as you probably will get killed if it's reasonably difficult content. Keeping Sunfire up while you're in AoE can add a little bit of DPS, and you should do it if you can without tanking in Moonkin form, but be smart about it. Now let's move on to Catweaving, which I think is a bit more of an iconic thing and something you should only ever do in raids while the other tank has threat. Basically, the main goal of Catweaving is to maintain Rake and Rip, your 2 cat bleeds, as much as you possibly can. Again, Convoke while in cat form or while you're not tanking, and try to Heart of the Wild either on the pull or immediately after taunt swap so that you can spend a lot more time in cat form, taking advantage of the damage and combo point bonus it provides. If your co-tank is tanking the boss first on the pull, you should Rake while stealthed and not refresh that Rake until it falls off, so that you don't overwrite the extra damage it deals. Your ideal opener from cat form will look like this. Heart of the Wild and Prowl before combat starts. Open on the boss with Rake, use an agility potion, shred your way up to 5 combo points, Rip, Convoke, Ferocious Bite, and then continue the cat rotation from there. As the main rotation goes, you basically just want to Rake whenever it's not up, use Shred to generate combo points if Rake is up and you won't lose uptime, and spend combo points on Rip primarily. If you can afford to Ferocious Bite without losing Rip uptime, go for it, but that's typically rare outside of Heart of the Wild or Convoke. Finally, it's called Catweaving because you weave in and out of it. You shouldn't just stay in cat form even when you're not tanking. You want to shift into cat form, apply all your bleeds, and use all of your energy up, then shift back into bear form, maintain Thrash, maintain Moonfire, use Mangle, and let your cat form energy regen. Then you shift back into cat form, do your thing, shift back into bear form, do bear stuff, and so on. Just sitting in cat form when you've spent all your energy and you're just at 0 energy, just auto-attacking as a cat, isn't actually adding damage. The point isn't just to do as much damage as you can in cat form, it's to do as much damage as you can total by maximizing the value of weaving between cat and bear forms. It may seem complicated because I guess technically it's kind of complicated compared to most other tanks, but it's really not that tough. You're mainly just trying to keep cat dots up on a single target and otherwise do your normal bear rotation, up until you need to taunt the boss again, and then you give yourself a couple of seconds in bear form to get Iron Fur up and taunt, and then you're good to go. Bears are an interesting class in terms of stat budget because it does vary with talents a little bit, but generally all the secondary stats are fairly close in value. I prioritize versatility, mainly just because it's very safe and good all-around stat. Haste is also good. Having a lot of it feels nice, more so than like crit or mastery. But, they're all fairly good. The main thing I would say with Bear Druid gearing is go after tier bonuses and all, but then just maximize your item level. Lightless Force as your weapon enchant is the way to go for dealing AoE damage, and Sinful Revelation is better for pure single target. Now let's move on to Trinkets. Inscrutable Quantum Device from the other side is a very strong stat on use trinket that's really good for maximizing your burst damage as a Vinthier Druid in Mythic Plus. The damage it adds during your Incarn combo is insane. Otherwise, I think it's basically not ever really worth using at all as a Bear Druid. Phial of Putrefaction from Plaguefall is a simple, single target DPS increase from Mythic Plus that's totally passive, but very nice. The best defensive trinket from Mythic Plus is Blood Spattered Scale, which is from the other side. It's an excellent defensive trinket that still offers a decent chunk of damage output. Both of these two trinkets were just nerfed within the last couple of days in an attempt to make other Mythic Plus trinket options more desirable, but they didn't buff anything else, so no, these are still the two best. Codex of the First Technique from Tazavesh is actually a pretty decent trinket, and I think it's something a lot of tanks will be farming now that Tazavesh is added to the Mythic Plus dungeon pool in Season 3. The stamina on this trinket is the real problem with it, but the damage reflection effect is pretty good for lowering your damage taken on raid fights where you're constantly tanking, and more Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus is really where this will shine. There are 2 new trinkets from Sepulchre of the first ones that are okay, but nothing really all that great. Pulsating Rift Shard is an active defensive trinket. It takes 3 seconds to go off, and it has a 1-minute cooldown. It's sort of like Blood Spattered Scale in that it deals damage that's split and gives you a shield, but the 3-second windup and the extremely thin line that it has make it pretty uncomfortable to use, and I do not think it's on the level of Blood Spattered Scale. On a training dummy, it's pretty good defensively, actually better, but in practice I have real concerns with being able to consistently hit your targets. That being said, the 1-minute cooldown is very good, so this could wind up being decent. They've rebalanced this trinket at least once, I think twice since I started working on this. And it's definitely worse offensively than it was. It's not good offensively at all right now, but defensively it could wind up being okay. It could also wind up being completely changed between now and the time it's available from raids, so I don't know, maybe it'll be great. The only thing that they could do to really make this thing more appealing to me would be buff the damage by a lot and reduce the amount of time it takes to go off. Just make it instant. Oh, and make the line wider. Pocket Protoforge is really simple. It's just a proc shield trinket. You take damage, it gives you a shield. It has an average proc rate of about 1 per minute, which is kind of low. It's decent, but not great. I will quickly mention Elegy of Eternals was a trinket that was giving over 1,000 secondary stat budget even as recently as like a week ago. But it has been nerfed, like the literal last 2 days of the PTR to be, you know, like 91% nerf. It's very bad now. Let's just skip it. Okay, let's quickly go over a couple of trinkets from Sanctum of Domination that I think could remain really good next tier. Shard of Anhilda's Aegis from the 9 is a really strong defensive bonus. It reduces a flat amount of damage from all hits and dot effects while it's active, and that calculation is done after all damage reduction effects are taken into account. It's terrific. The only way that this doesn't stay the golden trinket for tanks for the rest of the expansion is if it gets nerfed, which probably will happen. Depending on how hard it gets nerfed, it may still wind up being better than the trinkets from Sepulchre, the first ones. They'll have to nerf it pretty hard for it to be bad for bears. But they might. If they increase the cooldown by a lot, I think that would actually wind up doing more to nerf it than just simply lowering the value. Weave of Warped Fates has been redesigned to just be a normal cheat death trinket now. Unlike the Splintered Heart of Alar from Castle Nathria, it doesn't really do anything except prevent your death. No damage to nearby enemies and allies, and the item level is a full raid tier higher. That's good. It'll probably be a go-to trinket for high-level Mythic Plus for the rest of the expansion, and it should be a must-have for progression and Sepulchre of the first ones. And I think, you know, barring any more totally possible changes, I think it'll probably be one of the, like, must-have trinkets for Mythic Plus Season 3 the whole time. As we're heading into the final patch of Shadowlands, Bear Druids are looking very strong. The new content should be a lot of fun, and the new bonuses Druids are receiving are really good, even though Boomkids did their best to ruin everything. Bear Druids were pretty decent in Sanctum of Domination and absolutely dominant in Season 2 of Mythic Plus. I think they're going to be even better in raids than they were before, and at least as good in Mythic Plus Season 3, thanks to their new awesome tier set bonuses. I'm really looking forward to playing my Druid more in this new patch. Well, I think that covers it. If you have any questions about Bear Druids and Shadowlands Patch 9.2, ask away. Stay tuned for more Shadowlands content, and thank you for watching. Bye.